regular listeners of the program know that I always give my disclaimer when we start talking about politics, and especially the Democratic primary, that I do work for Bernie Sanders. And I should also remind you, in the interest of fairness, that I've already had somebody on who's written a book in support of Hillary Clinton. So joining us now, I've wanted to talk to this guy for a long time, been reading him for many years. Will Bunch is a veteran political journalist. He's the author of 3 books, including Tear Down This Myth, about the Reagan conservative mythology, and also a cool Kindle single book about Jukebox America, looking for the ideal jukebox in this country. And his latest is The Backlash: Right-Wing Radicals, High-Def Hucksters, and Paranoid Politics in the Age of Obama. But his latest ebook is The Bern, B-E-R-N, The Bern Identity, A Search for Bernie Sanders and the New American Dream. Will Bunch, thanks so much for joining us.
Richard, thank you so much for having me on. It's really a thrill to be on the show. Thank you so much.
Oh, I really appreciate that. So let's start with this. You've written a lot about the right. An activity I describe as spelunking in the dark caves of the human spirit. And now you've sort of pivoted a little bit, and you're writing about really, when you say Bernie Sanders and the New American Dream, you're writing about something a little bit more positive for a lot of us. First of all, what inspired you to write this book, The Bern Identity?
Well, first of all, I mean, you're right. It was just such a more fun project to write, to do this one, than about the Tea Party. I mean, I'm very fascinated with social movements of any kind, on the right or on the left, but especially on the left. In fact, I also did a Kindle single about Occupy Wall Street called October 1st, 2011. In this case, what really inspired me was just, I guess I got caught up in a surge of feeling over the summer of this year that a lot of people got caught up in. There was a time 6 or 7 months ago when I was really dreading this election, because I kind of bought into the early punditry, which is, how dumb is that? I don't know why I did, but I kind of bought into this idea that it was, that Hillary versus Jeb Bush was probably a done deal, and we were going to have these, dueling oligarchic dynasties competing for the White House, and I didn't want to have anything to do with it. And then, I knew Bernie Sanders was getting ready to run, and then he announced his candidacy, and I've obviously followed his long, steady political rise. But he was being portrayed kind of as a protest candidate, not somebody who was really in it to win it. But then when he got started, first he started drawing 5,000 people to rallies, then 10,000. Then he went out west and started getting 28,000 people at these rallies. And plus, like a lot of people, I just had at least some chance. I mean, as many people have been talking about the last couple of weeks, he's getting virtually no mainstream media coverage. But I did get at least more of a chance to hear what he had to say and understand what he was about, and it was exciting. And I just wanted to find out for itself. I was born in 1959. I was kind of a politically precocious kid, so I became kind of politically aware in the late 60s, early 70s, when I was still in grade school, middle school. But when I think back on those times, I just had this belief that, that the generation that was just before me, and that also the one that I was a part of, was, going to change the world. And it might be a struggle now, but 20, 30 years from now, we're going to be the majority. We're going to be, old enough to take over the White House, and it's going to be this kind of age of Aquarius, right? And
right.
then that didn't happen. Instead, we got Reagan. The second baby boomer president we got was George W. Bush, which was not exactly what I had in mind at all. And even Bill Clinton, who obviously did some good things in his 8-year presidency, but was also kind of a disappointing kind of middle of the road triangulator from kind of my point of view. And now, after all these years, after it seemed like that dream had just died, here was this guy who'd been an activist in the 60s, who carried those values around with him, who never never gave up believing in them, and here he was in 2015, 2016, running for president and like in a real contender, and I just had to see this for myself. You know.
Yeah, it is a fantastic story. We're talking with Will Bunch, whose latest book is the ebook is the Bern Bern Identity. It is fascinating, when Bernie asked me to go to work for him, I thought it'll be a great experience. Probably won't get very far, but he'll bring up a lot of great issues. Well, I was right about the latter, but boy, was I wrong about the former.
Right.
And the way it's caught on has been extraordinary. I was in Phoenix when he drew his first crowd of more than 10,000, and the energy in there. I saw the Beatles at Shea Stadium when I was for my 13th birthday. I mean, it was there was an enormous amount of energy in that room, and since then it's only continued to go up. But you mentioned something. Let's talk about the positive, and then we'll talk about some of the barriers, maybe. But
Right.
uh, how long ago did you decide to write this book, and have you been surprised by the continued trajectory of the campaign since you decided to do it?
I had I had mentioned to my agent who had handled my print books over the summer. There really needs to be a good independent biography of Bernie Sanders, and maybe we could get somebody to rush publish one, and it would be out for the campaign. And he was like, I don't know, who knows where this thing's going? It might not have much of a shelf life, and that's when I came up with the idea of possibly doing it as an ebook, which obviously has its pros and cons doing it that way. But the biggest pro is you can do it just super fast. I mean, this project. I reached out to the Amazon Kindle singles people that I'd worked with before in mid-September, basically early to mid-September, and it was published on December 8th. So we were able to turn this around in about 10 weeks.
One of the interesting things, Will, is that one of the interesting things I've heard Bernie say about, I'm going to say a month or 6 weeks ago, was when he was being interviewed by Chuck Todd. And at the end of the interview, Chuck Todd said, "Can you really see yourself winning this thing and becoming president?" or words to that effect. And Bernie's answer was, "Increasingly," which I loved as an answer for its honesty. In other words, it was basically saying, he now believes that this is a winnable campaign, even though, of course, the media continues to neglect him.
Yeah, I mean,
Go ahead.
Richard, he's been in this place before in his lifetime. When he ran for mayor of Burlington, Vermont in 1981, at that point. When he entered that race, I think a lot of people in Burlington, Vermont, weren't taking him seriously because he'd been this fringe third-party candidate who'd run for governor 3 times and run for Senate 3 times in Vermont, and he'd never gotten more than 6% of the vote. And the same thing happened in that race. He started to build a coalition. He went to the working-class neighborhood in Burlington, which is called the Old North End, and he went from door to door, and he stood in people's mudrooms, and he listened to their problems about trash collection and plowing the snow, and he promised to do a better job. And one by one, he won people over, and it wasn't until the very end that people realized, hey, he could win this thing. And so he's seen it happen before, and I think there's that excitement. But it's interesting. I think I totally agree with you that increasingly is kind of a fascinating answer, because I do think. I mean, one thing that kind of sets him apart from a lot of the other people in this presidential race, and when I say a lot of the other people, I'm talking mainly but not exclusively about some of the Republicans in the race, is a lot of those people are just so ego-driven. Somebody like Chris Christie is somebody who jumps to mind, who wants people to look at him and will kind of say anything to his policy positions basically stem from what will cause people to pay attention to me. And Bernie's the exact opposite of that. He's just been kind of a rock in what he believes for the last 50 years, and he's going to say those things over and over again and try and educate people. And so what's different about his campaign, I think, is for him, converting people to his ideas, and his way of viewing America and America's problems is a victory for him. Now, would he like to be the actual 45th president and have the chance to implement those ideas from the White House? Of course he would. Who wouldn't? But I think for him it's a different kind of campaign, partly because if he can get the nation, if Hillary Clinton is the punditocracy still predicts is going to be the nominee, if she ends up running on a platform that basically is 95% Bernie Sanders' platform, of course, she's not bound by that if she gets elected, but still, it will still be a step forward because he really believes in the long march. He's been on this long march for 50 years, and I'm sure he knows it's not over yet.
Yeah, and I think he also certainly, I mean, there's no question that by any standard that applied to his campaign when it was announced, he's already blown through any goals he could have possibly set in terms of changing the national conversation. He has certainly done that. And I guess the question going forward is one of the big impediments he's facing, and you alluded to it earlier, Will Bunch, author of The Bern Identity, is the fact that there's been this astonishing, almost third world style media blackout. I mean, the report that came out recently that showed that ABC News had dedicated 81 minutes of airtime to Donald Trump, and yet despite the fact that Bernie Sanders by net count has more followers because he has a similar percentage of the vote in the larger Democratic Party,
right.
Bernie has had a total of some 22 seconds.
20 seconds. Yeah, 22 seconds. Right. It's incredible.
So, yeah, I mean, it's astonishing. And is that, in effect, the greatest obstacle that Bernie has to overcome, you think?
It's one of a couple obstacles, and and I mean, I think it's horrible, and I think when I went to the rallies, when I went to a rally in Boston where there were 20,000 people, and a lot of these folks, these were not, professional political junkies who go to every political event. I mean, these were people, just regular middle class folks who heard that here was a guy who is advocating for free college tuition, and these people have children or themselves are up to their eyeballs in college related debt, and I think people want to hear more about his ideas, and I think that's tragic. I do think having worked in the mainstream media for 35 years myself, I know that I mean, Bernie is the anti-Reagan. Reagan invented the soundbite, and Reagan invented the photo op. That every day you give the media a fresh, beautiful picture that they haven't seen before, and every day you give them this pithy, colorful quote that probably fits into what they're already covering that day, and that's it. And Bernie doesn't play that game. He has his lecture, which is a great lecture. It's like this 55 minute long kind of view of America and what went wrong and what needs to be done, and he delivers that night after night, which and the people in attendance eat it up, but the media struggles with like how to make a headline, and they shouldn't. I mean, there are many ways they could cover this campaign, but they don't. But getting back to the other part of your question, though, is the biggest obstacle. I think the biggest obstacle is, I mean, part of it is just like always in politics, it's like circumstances. I mean, he's not running in a vacuum. I mean, this year he's running against Hillary Clinton, and Hillary Clinton just has, for all her pros and cons. I mean, I don't think anybody can deny that she has this huge reservoir of goodwill among some of the biggest, most likely to turn out at the polls constituencies within the Democratic Party, in a way that there's, I think, I hate to say this, but in some cases there's just really not that much that Bernie Sanders can do to break those connections that Hillary has formed. I mean, one that gets a lot of attention, and it should get a lot of attention because I think it's really critical, is Bernie just hasn't been able to break through in the African American community much. I mean, certainly among some young African Americans, he's certainly getting more support than he had 3 or 4 months ago. But especially among older black voters, I think it's a real uphill climb for him. And part of that is, the affinity that they had for Hillary's husband. Obviously, that was shaken somewhat when Obama. I mean, you just can't compare what Obama did in 2008 to what Bernie's trying to do in 2015 and 2016. It's just. I mean, Bernie is an ideas candidate, and he's going in. He's got to appeal to working class communities where people are more raised in transactional politics. What can you do for my community? And so that's less kind of about ideology and kind of more about what's your experience, what are your connections, that sort of thing. He's not going to win. He's not going to win that race. And I think that's his biggest obstacle. I think he's going to have. Coming. I think he's going to do well in Iowa. I think on the current trajectory, I think he's going to win in New Hampshire. He'll probably do okay in Nevada, but I think he's going to have a really hard time in South Carolina and some of those other states that vote early in the so-called SEC primary, unless things change. I mean, you're close to it. I mean, did you see it the same way or?
Well, I think we both see the obstacles the same way. I think he may have more of a chance of breaking through those constituencies, but I think there's no question that's one of his big challenges right now. But I think as people learn more in some of those communities about not just Bill Clinton's history, but Hillary Clinton's history with welfare reform, the Violent
Right.
Crime Control Act, and so on, he may do well, especially with younger generations of voters in a number of groups. He's already doing very well among younger women voters, for example.
Yeah,
And
exactly. Yeah, the New York Times had a great piece about that this weekend, and I see this in my own community. Lots of families where the daughters are almost always for Bernie. I mean,
yeah.
It's funny. I mean, I don't know. I'm the parent of two college kids myself, and I know a lot of young people, and I mean the support for Bernie Sanders among college age people and people in their early 20s is just off the charts.
It is, and I think the question is, to what extent does that energize not just you talked a lot about the people who typically vote Democratic, but I think the key to the potential success of Bernie Sanders and Bernie Sanders-like candidates in the future is going to be to what extent they can energize and mobilize people who have been discouraged from voting altogether. So
Right.
people say, not the Richard Eskows and Will Bunches, not the core voters in various democratic demographics, but the people, that vast majority who are not turning up, and hopefully that will, in retrespect, turn out.
Richard, I met a lot of people like that at Bernie's rallies. People who have spent the last 10 years, caring for a sick husband or dealing with unemployment or just down and out, and they're really looking for something that they can grasp onto. And one of the things I think that makes yeah.
That, unfortunately, is where we're going to have to leave it. But
Okay.
we'll have you back. We'll talk some more because I think it's a really fascinating and important conversation, and I'm enjoying it. So we will leave it there. We've been talking with Will Bunch, who is the author most recently of The Bern Identity, A Search for Bernie Sanders and the New American Dream. Find it on Amazon. Will, thanks so much for coming on the program.
Thanks, Richard. I really enjoyed it. Thank you so much.